Oh, I set the table just after noon, the lake wind sharp against the windows. The china clinked softly as I laid each plate. My hands moved out of habit, smoothing the embroidered tablecloth my mother left me. The scent of pumpkin pie lingered from the early morning bake, mixing with roasted turkey and buttery rolls. This was my first Thanksgiving without Frank. I had promised myself I would not sit alone. Elaine had agreed. She even said, "It'll be nice, Mom. Just the three of us." I clung to that. By 2 o'clock, everything was ready. Turkey resting, cranberry sauce cooling in the cut glass bowl, steam still curling from the mashed potatoes. I wore the navy dress Frank always loved, the one he said matched my eyes. My hair pinned, a gold brooch at my collar. I glanced at the clock, 2:30. 15 minutes until they walked through the door. I sent a quick text, "See you soon." No answer. 3 o'clock came. I stood by the front window watching the empty road. The lake shimmered under a pale sun, cold and bright. 3:15. I checked my phone again. Nothing. By 3:30, the rolls were back in the oven, music turned low. My chest felt tight. Maybe traffic. Maybe a late start. I lifted the foil on the potatoes, still warm. At 3:45, the phone buzzed. Relief flared, then faded as I read the message. "Sorry, Mom. We're having dinner at David's parents'. Hope you understand." No call. No explanation beyond those few words. The turkey on the counter blurred in my vision. I sat down at the table, the place settings glowing in the lamplight. One for me, one for Elaine, one for David. The candles flickered, their scent of cinnamon sweet and heavy. I tried a bite of turkey. My throat closed. The house, once full of oven heat, felt cold. Outside, wind rattled the maple leaves. I blew out the candles, packed the food into containers, my hands trembling. Only the pie stayed out, untouched, like a reminder of the morning's hope. Later, scrolling through Facebook, I saw them. Elaine and David at a long table, surrounded by his family. Glasses raised, plates heaped, Elaine's smile wide, David's arm around her. Underneath, the caption, "Thankful for a full house." Full except for me. I closed the laptop. My reflection in the darkened screen looked older than I remembered. The navy dress clung in all the wrong places. My hair drooped where the pins had loosened. I thought of past Thanksgivings. Frank carving the turkey, Elaine laughing as she mashed potatoes, the sound of the radio playing Bing Crosby in the background. We had a rhythm then. I believed it would last. The clock struck 6. I hadn't heard a single word from her since that text. The pie still sat on the counter, the crust softening. I poured tea into a mug, the steam curling into the dim kitchen. My hand brushed the back of Frank's chair as I passed the table. The wood was smooth, worn from years of his touch. Something inside me shifted. This wasn't a one-time oversight. It had been building. The short visits, the excuses, the way she sidestepped my invitations. I had ignored it, thinking love would be enough to keep her close. I rinsed my cup, set it in the sink. My eyes fell on the old hutch in the corner. A drawer sat slightly ajar. It had been like that since Frank died. I'd never opened it. Now, for reasons I couldn't name, I pulled it out. Inside was a plain envelope, edges yellowed. My name written in Frank's hand, steady, deliberate. I traced the letters with my fingertip, a prickle running up my spine. The kettle clicked off behind me, but I didn't move. My thumb slid under the flap. Inside, a single note, "If you're reading this, it's time." That was all. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the lake wind pressing against the walls, the candles cold. My heart beat slow and heavy. Time for what? Would you walk away from a family that left you behind, or fight to keep your place at the table? The smell of roasted turkey used to wake me before dawn. Back then, Frank would already be in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, humming low as he basted the bird. I'd join him, wrapping my robe tight against the early chill, the kettle singing on the stove. The radio played softly, always Bing Crosby or Nat King Cole, and the lake outside caught the pale gold of morning. Elaine was little then. She'd bounce into the kitchen, hair in tangles, clutching the paper turkey she made at school. "Put it on the fridge, Mom," she'd say, and I'd smile, taping it beside the shopping list. Frank would lift her up so she could sprinkle herbs on the potatoes, her giggle ringing through the house. By mid-morning, the whole place smelled of sage and cinnamon. I'd set the table in the dining room, white cloth smoothed flat, polished silver catching the light. Frank's chair at the head, mine opposite. Elaine between us, chattering about her favorite pie. Those were years when the phone rang all day, neighbors stopping by, my sister calling from Chicago, friends from church dropping off cranberry bread. Laughter and voices spilled through every room. Even the wind off the lake seemed gentler then. I remember one year in particular. Elaine must have been 12. We had a late snow, flakes drifting past the window as we carved the turkey. Frank made his famous joke about the wishbone and Elaine rolled her eyes but saved it anyway. After dinner, we walked down to the dock, boots crunching in fresh snow, the lake a sheet of silver under the moon. Frank put his arm around me, and for a moment, everything felt so certain. Now, the silence feels heavier. The fridge holds no paper turkeys, just neatly stacked leftovers from a meal no one shared. The radio stays off. Frank's chair is empty. And that envelope, its weight lingers in my mind. I'd set it on the hutch after reading the note, unable to shake the chill it sent through me. What did he mean? Time for what? His handwriting was steady, the ink slightly faded but clear. Frank wasn't a man of riddles. If he left me those words, they mattered. I run my hand over the tablecloth. Still the same one from those lively years. My fingers catch on a loose thread. I tug gently, then stop, feeling the pull in the fabric. Some things unravel slowly, almost without you noticing. I pour another cup of tea, the steam soft against my face, and glance toward the hutch again. That drawer waits, just as it did before. Only now I know it holds more than wood and paper. The letter's single line burned in my mind. If you're reading this, it's time. I set it on the table and walked to the window. The lake was a sheet of dark glass now, holding the last light of the day. Somewhere out there, Frank had taught Elaine to skip stones. I could still hear her squeal when one bounced 5 times. That was a lifetime ago. I thought back to other signs, small, quiet fractures. Last Christmas, she left after an hour, saying they had another stop to make. In the spring, she skipped my birthday, texting later that she was too swamped to visit. Even the summer barbecue, she brought store-bought potato salad and left before dessert. I told myself she was busy. That life for her was just crowded. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't part of the crowd anymore. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon and cooling pie. I ran my hand over the envelope again. Frank's handwriting was calm, as if he'd known I'd find it exactly when I needed it. He always did have that way, seeing the hurt before I spoke it. I remembered the last real Thanksgiving we'd all had together, Frank carving the turkey, his sleeves rolled up, Elaine leaning against the counter with a glass of Sutter, David telling some long story, and me pretending not to notice Frank slipping me the crispy skin from the bird because he knew it was my favorite. The room had been warm from both the oven and the people inside it. Now, the warmth was memory. The walls seemed to hold their breath. I sat down, the chair legs scraping the floor. My fingers traced the brooch at my collar, the one Frank gave me on our 25th anniversary, for every time you felt unseen. He'd told me, fastening it with a smile. I felt unseen now. The note was light in my hand, my thumb pressed against the fold, sensing the faint bump of more paper inside. This wasn't just a message, it was a doorway. I hesitated. Once I opened it, I couldn't go back to pretending things would fix themselves. I couldn't go back to thinking love alone could hold the weight. The house was still, the only sound the soft tick of the kitchen clock. I slid my finger along the crease. The paper inside whispered as I unfolded it. Frank's words waited for me in the lamplight. I hadn't spoken to Elaine since Thanksgiving Day. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter, unopened, like a shadow in the corner of my vision. I told myself I'd read it when I was ready, but readiness never came. On the following Tuesday, I decided to run into town. The December wind was sharp enough to sting my cheeks. Snow dusted the sidewalks, the lake hidden under a lid of white clouds. I pulled my coat tighter, the wool collar scratching my neck. The grocery store was half empty. I was reaching for a carton of eggs when I heard her voice. Light, almost sing-song, but edged. Elaine. She was 2 aisles over, talking to someone I didn't recognize. A tall woman in a puffer jacket. I froze, one hand on the eggs. I swear she just can't manage things anymore, Elaine said. The house is too much for her. She forgets things. It's sad, really. The words hit like ice water down my back. Manage things. Forget? I gripped the carton so hard the cardboard dented. The other woman murmured something I couldn't catch. Elaine laughed softly. David and I are thinking maybe it's time she, downsized. Somewhere she can be looked after. Somewhere she can be looked after. Like I was a stray cat needing a warm porch. I stepped into the aisle, my cart rolling in front of me. Hello, Elaine. Her smile flickered before it returned, bright and brittle. Mom. What a surprise. The tall woman looked between us, sensing the shift. Manage things? I asked, my voice steady. My coat still held the cold from outside, and I could feel it seeping into my bones. Elaine tilted her head. Oh, I was just saying you've got a lot on your plate. The house, the upkeep. I've managed that house for 40 years, I said. With your father. Alone when I had to. Her eyes darted to her companion. Of course, I didn't mean anything by it. But she had. Every syllable carried meaning, and the meaning was that I was no longer capable in her eyes. The air in the aisle felt tight. I could smell the faint sweetness of the bakery section nearby, the yeasty warmth of bread cooling on racks. It didn't match the taste in my mouth. Metallic, bitter. I placed the eggs in my cart and straightened. Enjoy your shopping, I said. Elaine opened her mouth, then closed it. The other woman touched her arm, murmured something. I walked away before she could follow. At the checkout, I could see them still talking. Both glanced in my direction once, then turned back to each other. Outside, the wind cut sharper than before. My hands were steady on the cart handle, but inside something was shifting again, hardening. That night, I set the grocery bags on the counter, the envelope still waiting in its corner. I picked it up, weighing it in my hand. Frank's words echoed in my mind. If you're reading this, it's time. I slid my finger under the flap. The paper inside was heavier than I expected, the kind that held its shape no matter how often it was folded. I unfolded it slowly, the creases crackling in the quiet kitchen. Margaret, it began. If you're reading this, it means I'm not there to tell you in person. I've made arrangements. Things I hope will keep you safe, no matter what. I sank into the chair, the one Frank used to favor, its cushion sagging in the middle. My thumb smooth-sagged the paper as my eyes moved over his steady handwriting. You've always been strong. Stronger than you know, but strength needs a shield. That's why I moved the farmhouse into your name alone back in 2015. The deed is in the lockbox at First Harbor Bank, under your key. No one else can touch it. Not Elaine. Not David. My breath caught. The farmhouse. His family's place by the South Ridge. We hadn't been there in years, not since Elaine moved out. But it was ours. Mine. I could almost smell the cedar walls, hear the floorboards creak under Frank's boots. The memory wrapped around me, warm and sudden. There's more, the letter continued. I set aside funds in a separate account, also under your name only. You'll find the details in the same box. If anyone tries to tell you what you can or can't manage, remember, you hold the keys. I pressed the page to my chest. The envelope had felt like a weight for days. Now I understood. It wasn't a burden. It was armor. I could see him in my mind, leaning against the porch rail at the farmhouse, the lake breeze ruffling his hair. Don't let anyone write you out of your own story, he'd say. The kitchen clock ticked behind me. I looked toward the counter, at the neat row of groceries from earlier, the eggs resting in their carton. Elaine's voice from the store replayed in my head. She can't manage things anymore. I pictured her face when she found out what I truly held. The lamplight pooled over the letter, casting my shadow long across the table. My hands no longer shook. There was a steadiness in my chest I hadn't felt since Frank was alive. I refolded the paper, slid it back into its envelope, and tucked it into the pocket of my coat. The wool scratched at my wrist, grounding me in the moment. Outside, the lake wind moaned against the siding. It sounded different now, less lonely, more like a call. I turned off the light in the kitchen, the darkness settling gently around me. Tomorrow I would go to First Harbor Bank. I would open the lockbox. I would see, with my own eyes, what Frank had left for me. And then, I would decide what to do with it. I closed the door to the kitchen, the latch clicking softly. Somewhere inside me, the first outlines of a plan began to form. I hadn't said a word to Elaine since the grocery store. But on Friday morning, her car pulled into my driveway, tires crunching over the thin crust of snow. The sound carried through the house like a warning. I was in the living room, folding laundry, when she knocked. 3 sharp raps. I took my time answering. "Mom?" she said, stepping inside before I could invite her. The cold clung to her coat, a faint scent of perfume following. "We need to talk." The was never good. She set her purse on the coffee table, unzipped it and pulled out a manila folder. "David and I have been thinking. The house is a lot for you. Upkeep, property taxes, these things add up. We found a buyer who's very interested." My fingers tightened around the towel in my hands. "A buyer? For my home." She smiled as if this was a gift. "You'd get a good price? Enough to live comfortably in a smaller place? Maybe a condo near us?" The living room felt smaller. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder, pressing in. "I didn't ask for a smaller place," I said. Elaine's tone sharpened. "Mom, be reasonable. Winter here is harsh. You're alone. What if something happens? Frank's letter burned in my coat pocket across the room. I've managed before. She slid a document from the folder. The paper gleamed white under the morning light. This is just an agreement to start the process. No commitment yet. But signing shows you're open to offers. I didn't reach for it. My pulse thudded in my ears. She pushed it closer. You don't even have to read all the details right now. David and I can help with the legal stuff. The words help and legal in the same sentence made my stomach knot. The faint aroma of coffee from my mug on the table now tasted bitter in my mouth. I set the folded towel aside. I'm not signing anything today. Her eyes narrowed. You can't keep this place forever. Sooner or later, it will be too much. I thought of the lockbox at First Harbor Bank. The farmhouse deed. The account Frank had tucked away. I thought of how quickly Elaine's tone might change if she knew. Maybe, I said softly. But not today. She leaned back, crossing her arms. You're making things harder than they need to be. I stood, the floor creaking under my weight. I've lived in this house for 40 years. I'm not ready to leave it. For a moment, silence hung heavy between us. The only sound was the wind nudging against the windows. Finally, she gathered the papers, sliding them back into the folder with a snap. Think about it, she said, her voice clipped. I'll call you next week. She left without another word. Through the front window, I watched her walk to her car, boots leaving sharp prints in the snow. When the door clicked shut, I went to my coat. My fingers closed around the envelope in its pocket, the paper warm from being near me. If you're reading this, it's time. I looked toward the phone on the side table. There was one call I needed to make before the bank closed. The phone felt cold against my ear as I spoke to the bank receptionist. Yes, I'd like to access my lockbox today. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. She gave me a polite time slot, 2 o'clock. Enough hours for my thoughts to churn. By the time I left the house, the snow had picked up. Fine, dry flakes swept across the road, clinging to the windshield. The heater hummed, filling the car with the faint smell of warm fabric. My fingers gripped the wheel, knuckles pale. First Harbor Bank sat at the corner of Main and Sycamore, a brick building with brass handles that caught the dull winter light. Inside, the air was warm, carrying a faint scent of polished wood and paper. My boots clicked softly on the marble floor as I approached the front desk. The teller, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, smiled. Mrs. Holloway? Right this way? She led me past the counters, down a narrow hall to the vault. The heavy door loomed ahead, its steel bolts visible like muscle under skin. My heart ticked faster with each step. Inside, the lockbox room was quiet except for the low hum of ventilation. She unlocked a narrow drawer halfway down the wall and set the box on a table. Take your time, she said, then stepped out, closing the door behind her. The metal box was cool under my palms. I slid the key into its lock, the click echoing in the small room. The lid lifted easily. On top was the farmhouse deed, its paper thick and slightly yellowed. My name was printed in bold, clear letters. Margaret Holloway, sole owner. I traced the ink, a slow smile forming without my permission. Beneath it, a sealed envelope from the bank. I opened it to find account details, balances, statements. The numbers stared back at me, solid and undeniable. Enough to keep the house, enough to keep my independence, enough to decide my own future. A warmth spread through my chest, pushing back against the chill of the last few days. Frank hadn't just trusted me. He'd prepared for the moment when I might need proof of my own strength. I imagined Elaine's face if she knew. The way her confident tone would falter, the calculation in her eyes shifting. The thought was tempting, but I kept it tucked away. Quiet victories were sweeter when you chose the moment to reveal them. I gathered the papers, placing them neatly back into the box. My hands didn't shake this time. The air in the vault felt different now. Less like a tomb, more like a sanctuary. Locking the box, I slid it back into its place. The teller returned, her heels soft on the carpet.
All set?
She asked.
Yes,
I said, my voice calm. All set? Back in the car. The snow had stopped, leaving a pale sky overhead. I rested my hands on the steering wheel, the weight in my pocket reassuring. This was mine, unshakable. As I turned the key in the ignition, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked sharper, focused. Ready. I didn't know exactly how I'd use this advantage yet. But I knew one thing. Elaine wouldn't see it coming. The days after the bank visit were quiet. Too quiet. Snow piled along the edges of the driveway, the plow leaving uneven ridges I had to kick apart with my boots. I called Elaine twice. Both times my calls went to voicemail. No reply. On Sunday, I tried reaching David, he answered, but his voice was short. "We're busy today, Mom. Can we talk later?" Later never came. The house felt bigger in the silence. Each room carried a faint echo. My footsteps in the hall, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the creak of the stair railing when I passed by. I'd turn on the radio for company, only to switch it off again when the chatter felt hollow. One afternoon, I drove into town for milk and bread. At the market, I saw two women from the church, standing by the produce section. When I waved, they hesitated before lifting their hands in return. A thin, polite smile. Conversation stayed between them. The air outside was sharp enough to sting my lungs as I carried my groceries to the car. It wasn't just Elaine and David pulling away. It felt like the whole circle around me was shrinking. On Tuesday, the phone rang. I expected another sales call, but the voice was warm. "Margaret?" "It's Ruth." Ruth lived 2 houses down, a widow like me. We'd shared pies and recipes over the years, but months had passed since we'd spoken. "I made too much soup," she said. "Thought you might want some company." Her kitchen was bright with the smell of chicken broth and fresh herbs. She handed me a steaming bowl, her hands warm against mine. "You doing all right?" she asked. I hesitated, watching the steam curl up. "I've been better." She studied my face. "It's Elaine, isn't it?" I looked down at the soup. "They've been distant." Ruth sighed, pulling out a chair. Families can be strange when they think they know what's best for you. We ate together, the soup rich and comforting. The clink of spoons was steady, grounding. When I left, Ruth handed me a jar of her homemade jam. "Just in case you need something sweet," she said with a wink. Back home, I placed the jar on the counter beside the envelope from Frank. The contrast struck me. 2 small acts of care, both holding more weight than the people who should have been here. That night, the wind rattled the windows. I sat in Frank's old chair, wrapped in a blanket, flipping through a photo album. Elaine's smile in those pictures was younger, lighter. My own hair darker, my hands less lined. I closed the album, the leather cover cool under my palms. The truth was harder to ignore now. Elaine and David weren't just busy, they were choosing to step away. And if they were stepping away, it meant they were leaving space for something else to step in. I just wasn't sure yet whether that something would be mine to choose. The next week stretched long and thin. Morning light came late, spilling pale across the frozen lake. I'd wake to the sound of the furnace kicking on, its low rumble filling the silence. Some mornings I'd make oatmeal, others just tea, the steam curling into the air like it had nowhere to be. Elaine's name stayed absent from my phone. No texts, no calls. When I sent a short message, "Thinking of you," it showed as read, but got no reply. On Thursday, I saw David at the hardware store. He was in line ahead of me, buying salt for the driveway. When he turned and spotted me, his smile was polite but distant, like I was a neighbor he barely knew. "How's Elaine?" I asked. "She's fine," he said quickly, glancing toward the cashier. "Busy?" That was all. He left before I could say more. The air outside was brittle, snapping at my cheeks as I walked to the car. I sat there a moment before starting the engine, watching my breath cloud the windshield. It was like a season had shifted inside me, one where the warmth of family was replaced by a cold I couldn't quite shake. That evening, Ruth knocked on my door. She had a tin of cookies wrapped in red paper. "Figured you could use a taste test," she said. We sat in the kitchen, the scent of cinnamon and butter filling the space. Ruth told me about her grandkids visiting next month, her voice bright. Then she paused, studying me. "They still keeping their distance?" I nodded. "Feels like more than distance." Her eyes softened. "You can't control how they behave. Only how you take care of yourself." I wanted to believe that. I wanted it to be enough. Later, after she left, I carried the cookie tin into the living room. The lamp cast a warm pool of light, catching on the edge of Frank's envelope still on the counter. I'd moved it 3 times that day without realizing it. Outside, the wind pushed against the house, whistling through the eaves. I imagined Elaine sitting at her in-law's table, laughter mixing with the clink of glasses. I tried to picture her thinking about me, but the image wouldn't hold. Friday came, bringing another layer of snow. I shoveled slowly, the cold biting through my gloves. Halfway through, I saw Ruth waving from her porch. She was bundled in a heavy scarf, her breath puffing in the air. "You need help," she called. "I've got it," I said, though my arms ached. She came down anyway, taking the second shovel from her shed. We worked in steady rhythm, the scrape of metal on concrete the only sound. When we finished, she clapped her hands together. Looks good enough to make the postman jealous. For the first time in days, I smiled without forcing it. Back inside, I poured 2 mugs of hot cocoa and carried one next door. Ruth's living room smelled faintly of pine from a small tree in the corner. We sat by the window, watching the snow drift past the streetlight. "Thanks for being here," I said quietly. She glanced over. "We've got to look out for each other, Margaret. No one else will do it quite the same." Her words stayed with me long after I walked home, crunching through the snow. The night felt cold, but not empty. The invitation came in the mail, a glossy card with gold lettering Annual Harbor Lights Winter Gala. The community center held it every December. Frank and I had gone for years, sharing a table with neighbors, dancing once or twice when the band played something slow. I almost tossed it aside, but Ruth convinced me. "You need to get out. Wear something that makes you feel like yourself." So I wore my deep green dress, the one with the satin collar. Snowflakes swirled under the street lamps as I pulled into the community center's lot. Inside, the air was warm, carrying the scent of mulled cider and evergreen wreaths. The hall shimmered with string lights. People milled about in coats and sparkles, their voices mingling over the soft hum of a jazz trio. I spotted Elaine and David across the room, standing with a cluster of people near the buffet. For a moment, I thought about turning around. Ruth caught my arm. "Come on, let's at least get you a drink." We made our way to the refreshment table. That's when I heard it. Elaine's voice clear over the chatter. "Mom's here. Keep an eye on her. She's been forgetful lately." The words slid into me like a blade. My back stiffened. She wasn't talking to me. She wasn't even looking at me. She was talking about me to a woman I barely knew. The woman glanced over, eyes flicking up and down, then gave a small pitying smile. I set my cup down, my hands trembling slightly. "Elaine," I said, stepping forward. She turned, surprise flickering before her face smoothed. "Oh, Mom, I didn't see you there."
"You didn't have to," I said.
My voice was steady, but my cheeks burned. Her smile tightened. "I was just saying how wonderful it is you came tonight." "It's been a while." "That's not what I heard," I replied. The small group fell silent. I could feel the weight of their eyes, the buzz of curiosity. Ruth stood behind me, close enough that I could feel her presence. But she didn't speak. Elaine laughed lightly, the sound brittle. "Mom, you're taking things the wrong way." "I'm taking them exactly as you said them," I told her. A man from the group shifted uncomfortably. The music seemed too loud now, the saxophone notes sharp in the air. Elaine's tone dipped, meant for me alone but still audible. "Don't make a scene." The irony made my stomach turn. She was the one who turned me into a topic, and now I was the problem for answering it. I stepped back, my pulse in my ears. "Enjoy your evening," I said, my voice cool. Ruth touched my arm gently, guiding me toward an empty table near the back of the hall. I sat, feeling the room tilt slightly, the laughter from across the room like a distant wave. Through the glow of the lights, I watched Elaine lean back into her group, her head close to David's. Their smiles returned, easy and untroubled. The cider in my cup had gone cold. I set it aside and let my eyes wander around the room. Couples danced near the band. Children spun under the twinkle lights. None of it touched me. Ruth leaned in. "You don't have to stay." "I know," I said. But my feet didn't move, because leaving would be easy. Staying meant seeing. And I wanted to see every expression, every careless word, so I could remember exactly what I was up against. The jazz trio shifted to something brighter, and people moved toward the dance floor. From my table at the back, I watched Elaine and David glide easily among the crowd, their voices mingling with laughter. Ruth went to fetch more cider. I stayed seated, the green satin collar of my dress catching the light each time I moved. That's when the MC, a tall man in a red blazer, stepped up to the microphone. "Let's give a warm welcome to one of our long-time community members, Margaret Holloway." Applause rippled across the hall. My stomach tightened. I hadn't signed up for anything. Before I could react, Elaine appeared beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "Go on, Mom. Say a few words." I didn't. She leaned closer, smiling for the audience. "Just tell them how you're doing these days. Keep it short." Her grip was light, but the meaning was heavy. The eyes of the room were on me now. I stood, the murmur of the crowd washing over me. The microphone felt colder than the winter air outside. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady but low. "I'm glad to see so many familiar faces." From the corner of my eye, I saw Elaine whisper something to the man in the red blazer. He chuckled into his fist. "She's been through a lot." Elaine called out. Some days are better than others, right, Mom? A few awkward laughs scattered through the crowd. My throat went tight. I smiled faintly, letting my gaze sweep the room. Some days are better than others, I said. But I find the best days are when people show up for each other. Ruth returned then, standing near the edge of the crowd. I caught her small nod, stay calm. Elaine's voice rang out again. We all worry about her being alone in that big house. Maybe we can convince her to move somewhere easier. The word easier landed like a slap. Easier for whom? I let a pause stretch just long enough for the room to shift uncomfortably. It's kind of you to worry, I said evenly. But I've been managing that house for 40 years. I'm not in a hurry to give up the keys. A flicker passed over Elaine's face. Surprise quickly smoothed into a polite smile. The MC clapped his hands, breaking the tension. Well, here's to many more years, Margaret. The crowd applauded, some genuinely, others just to fill the space. I handed back the microphone, my hands warm now. Not from nerves, but from the quiet satisfaction of not letting her rewrite my story in public. Elaine rejoined David without another glance in my direction. The band started up again, and the moment dissolved into the swirl of music and chatter. Ruth came to sit beside me, sliding a fresh cup of cider across the table. You handled that, she said. Not the way she expected, I replied. The string lights above flickered once, casting the room in a softer glow. I realized that while Elaine had spoken the loudest, people had also seen how I answered. Quietly, directly, without retreat, we stayed until the gala began to thin out. When I stepped outside, the night air was sharp and clean, the snow crunching under my heels. I pulled my coat close, the envelope in my inner pocket pressing lightly against my side. I thought about Frank, about the farmhouse, about the account that no one else knew existed. And I thought about the moment, soon, when all of that would matter. For now, I had what I needed, time and the truth. Would you have spoken up in front of everyone, or stayed silent to keep the peace? It started with a phone call from Dr. Latham's office. Mrs. Holloway. The nurse said, we're following up on your prescription refill. Just confirming you've switched to the generic. I frowned. I haven't switched anything. A pause. Papers shuffled on the other end. It shows here, signed authorization from a family member. Your daughter. The word authorization echoed in my ear. I never signed that. The nurse hesitated. Would you like me to send a copy? Yes, I said. My hand was tight on the receiver. Email it today? By afternoon, the email arrived. I sat at the kitchen table, snowlight spilling across the screen. The scanned form had my name typed neatly, but the signature, slanted loose, wasn't mine. Below it, in smaller print, authorized by Elaine Holloway Price. My pulse thudded in my ears. The generic medication was cheaper, yes, but that wasn't the point. It was my decision to make. I scrolled further down. The date on the form was the same week Elaine had skipped my birthday. I leaned back in my chair, the wood pressing against my spine. Memories of small intrusions surfaced, mail that looked like it had been opened, conversations with my insurance company where they claimed they'd already spoken to my daughter. I had brushed them aside as mix-ups. Now they lined up in a clear row. I printed the form, the smell of warm paper filling the air. Sliding it into a folder, I felt the edges bite against my palm. This wasn't just about medication. If she could sign for that, what else could she sign for? Ruth stopped by later with a basket of bread. She saw the printouts on the table. What's this? Proof? I said. Her brows knitted. Of what? I told her. Every detail. The call, the form, the signature. She's testing boundaries, Ruth said. Seeing how much she can take before you notice. I nodded. And she's already taken more than she should. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked in the wind, the radiator ticking. I lay in bed replaying every conversation with Elaine in the last year. Each one had a shadow I hadn't noticed before. At 2 a.m, I gave up trying to rest. I went to the study and unlocked Frank's old desk. Inside were file folders neatly labeled in his handwriting. Property taxes, insurance policies, bank statements. I pulled out the insurance folder. A second authorization form sat near the back, this one for full access to my account. The signature looked like mine at first glance, but I could see the difference in the loop of the "gi," the slant of the "t." My throat tightened. She had already stepped into places she didn't belong. I set the folder on the desk, my fingers drumming against the wood. The envelope from Frank was still in my coat pocket in the hall. I didn't need to read it again to know what it meant now. It was more than a safeguard. It was a weapon, if I chose to use it. Outside, the wind carried a thin hiss across the frozen lake, the kind of sound that made you listen harder. I gathered the papers, both authorizations, and slid them into the folder with the deed copies from the bank. Together, they felt heavier than their weight. Tomorrow I would find out exactly how far she'd gone. The morning sky was the color of unpolished silver when I pulled on my coat. I tucked the folder of forged authorizations into my bag, next to the gloves I might not need inside the bank. First Harbor's parking lot was half empty. The wind chased a swirl of dry snow across the asphalt as I walked in. The lobby's heat wrapped around me, carrying the faint scent of pine from a wreath above the door. At the counter, a young teller smiled. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to review all accounts in my name," I said. "Including any joint or authorized access?" She nodded, fingers tapping the keyboard. "May I see your ID?" I slid it across the counter. She scanned it, the machine humming softly. Then her brows lifted slightly. "There is a note here. Your daughter, Elaine Holloway Price, is listed as having secondary access to your primary checking." My jaw tightened. "When was that added?" She clicked through screens. "Looks like last August." Last August? The same month Elaine helped me reorganize the file cabinet. "Please print the authorization form," I said. She hesitated, then stood and walked to a back office. I could hear the faint whir of the printer. My heart beat slow but heavy, each thump echoing in my chest. When she returned, the paper slid across the counter toward me. My eyes went straight to the signature, my name but not my hand. "Them was wrong, the curve too shallow." "I never signed this," I said quietly. The teller's eyes widened. "Would you like to speak with the branch manager?" "Yes," I said. She disappeared again, and a moment later, a man in a navy suit appeared. His handshake was firm, his voice low. "Mrs. Holloway, let's step into my office." The room smelled faintly of leather and coffee. I sat across from him, the forged form between us. "This is not my signature," I told him. He studied it, then looked up. "We can freeze her access immediately and flag the account for any future changes. But you'll need to fill out an affidavit stating you did not authorize this." "Do it?" I said. He slid a form across the desk. My pen moved quickly, each stroke deliberate. When I finished, he gathered the papers into a neat stack. "From this moment," he said, "only you can access these funds. No exceptions." A warmth spread through my chest. Not relief exactly, but something closer to control. As I stood to leave, he added, "If you'd like, we can run a check on all linked accounts to see if there's been any unusual activity."
Yes,
I said again. My voice was calm. He promised to call by the end of the day. Back in the car, the air felt sharper, the steering wheel cold against my palms. I sat for a long moment before turning the key. In my bag, the folder with the forged authorizations felt heavier than before. Elaine had stepped far beyond helping. She'd been building a path into my life where she had no right to walk. The lake came into view as I drove home, a sheet of white under the pale sky. I thought of the lockbox, the deed, the separate account Frank had left me. Untouched. Untouchable. At the house, I set the folder on the kitchen table. The kettle hissed on the stove. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches against the siding. When the phone rang, I knew it would be the bank manager. I picked it up, ready to hear exactly what else she'd tried to take. The bank manager's voice stayed with me long after I hung up. "There's been no withdrawals yet?" He'd said, but there were 2 attempts. Both blocked after today's change. 2 attempts. The words rolled through my head like loose marbles, impossible to ignore. That night, I couldn't settle. The wind off the lake pressed against the windows, making the glass hum. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the tree outside swaying across the plaster. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Elaine's handwriting on that forged form, the loop of the letters, the certainty it took to put my name down as if it were hers. By midnight, I was pacing the hall. My bare feet were cold against the hardwood, the boards creaking softly. The envelope from Frank sat on the hall table, the paper worn from my hands. I opened it again, though I'd memorized every word. "You hold the keys." Frank's voice in my mind was clear, steady. He'd always believed in acting without fanfare, choosing the right moment, not the loud one. I poured tea in the kitchen, the steam fogging my glasses. Across the room, the folder of bank papers sat where I'd left it, a silent witness. I thought of the last winter Frank was alive. We'd sat at this same table, making lists for repairs and expenses. He'd said, "If you want to keep control, you need to see every detail yourself." At 2 a.m., I took a legal pad from the drawer and began writing, not a diary entry. Step 1, secure the farmhouse and its deed. Step 2, move the separate account to a new branch. No linked records. Step 3, collect proof. Every document, every signature that wasn't mine. The pen scratched against the paper, the sound oddly calming. I added small notes in the margin: do not confront yet watch. Wait. Outside, the snow had stopped. The moonlight lay across the lake like brushed steel. I pressed my palm to the cold glass, the chill traveling up my arm. In the stillness, I realized Elaine didn't know I knew. That was my advantage. I returned to the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my mug. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. Somewhere in that silence was Frank, steady as ever. By 3, I had 3 full pages. My handwriting was neat, deliberate. No flourishes, no hesitation. I stacked the pages, slid them into a manila envelope, and tucked it into the drawer beside the sink. It wasn't just paper. It was a map out of the corner she'd been painting me into. As I turned off the lights, the floor cool under my feet, I felt the first pull of sleep. Not the restless kind, but the kind that comes when you know exactly what you're going to do next. Tomorrow, I would take the first step. The morning broke pale and still, the kind of winter light that made the lake look frozen in place. I woke with a clear mind. The plan sat where I'd left it, folded neatly in the kitchen drawer. I dressed in layers, the wool of my sweater catching slightly at my wrists. The kettle hissed on the stove as I made tea. I didn't glance at my phone. I knew there'd be no message from Elaine. Instead, I pulled the cordless phone from its cradle and dialed the number for a bank in the next county, one Elaine had no reason to visit. A man answered, his voice brisk but friendly. Union Valley Savings, this is Carl. I'd like to open a private account, I said. Only in my name. No shared access, no linked information. We can do that! You'll need to bring identification and proof of address. I glanced at the envelope from Frank on the table. I have both, I said. We set an appointment for Thursday morning. After hanging up, I gathered the folder of forged forms, the deed copies, and my own notes. I placed them into a plain canvas tote, tucking it under my coat. The farmhouse was next on my list. It sat an hour away, along a road that wound through bare trees and open fields. I told myself I was just going to check the locks. But really, I needed to see it again, to remind myself what I was protecting. The gravel drive crunched under my tires as I pulled up. The house stood quiet, its cedar siding weathered but strong. Snow edged the roof, sunlight catching on the frost. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and pine. My boots echoed on the floorboards as I walked from room to room. The kitchen still had the old enamel stove Frank refused to replace. Upstairs, the bedroom windows faced the ridge, the same view we'd shared on mornings with coffee in hand. I checked each lock, each window latch. All secure. I wrote the date in a small notebook I kept in my coat pocket. On the way back, I stopped at the post office. The clerk slid a small stack of mail across the counter. Among the envelopes was one from my insurance company. I didn't open it there, but my fingers felt the thickness of the contents. Back home, I set the tote on the table and opened the insurance letter. Inside was a notice, request for confirmation of a change in policy beneficiaries. The date was last month. The requester's name, Elaine Holloway, price. A slow heat spread in my chest. She hadn't just been reaching into my accounts. She was testing the edges of everything I owned. I slid the letter into the folder with the rest. The stack was growing, thick enough now that it had weight in my hands. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. I closed the curtains and locked the back door. In the quiet, I poured another cup of tea, the steam curling upward like a signal no one else could see. My phone buzzed on the counter. Elaine, a text thinking we should talk soon. I stared at the words, my reflection faint in the screen. Then I set the phone down without answering. I had work to finish before any talk. Thursday came with a hard frost. The driveway glittered under a thin sun as I backed the car out, the tote with my documents on the passenger seat. At Union Valley Savings, Carl met me in a small glass-walled office. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh paper. Everything ready? He asked. I slid my ID and proof of address across the desk. Let's keep this as private as possible. He nodded, typing quickly. This account will have no online access unless you request it. No third-party authorizations. Deposits and withdrawals in person only. The printer hummed, warm sheets sliding into the tray. I signed each one, the pen gliding smoothly. When we were done, Carl handed me a checkbook and a small safe deposit key. Your box is ready whenever you need it, he said. I left with the new account already holding a modest transfer from my separate funds at First Harbor. The account Frank had left me, enough to cover expenses for a year without touching the checking Elaine could still see. Back home, I moved through the house in quiet rhythm. First, I changed the contact information with my utility companies, new mailing address to a P.O. box in Union Valley. Elaine would no longer be able to intercept a stray bill or notice. Next, I called the insurance company. A woman named Patty answered, her voice soft and patient. "I'd like to confirm no changes have been made to my policy," I said. There was a pause as she typed. "A request was submitted last month, but it's still pending. We haven't processed it. Please cancel it," I said. "And add a note that no changes are valid unless I'm present in person." She agreed, her tone firming with understanding. "We'll make that permanent on your file." I thanked her, the relief running deeper than I expected. In the afternoon, I set up a ledger at the kitchen table. Each entry was precise date, action, reason. Feb 13 opened private account at UVS. Feb 13 changed utility contact info. Feb 13 canceled unauthorized insurance change. The pen's steady scratch on the paper felt like progress. Every line was a small wall built between me and Elaine's reach. Around 3, Ruth stopped by with a bag of oranges. "You've been busy," she said, eyeing the paper spread across the table. "Just tidying up," I replied. She set the fruit down, then lowered her voice. "Lane called me yesterday. Asked if you'd been acting strange." I looked at her. "And what did you say?" "That you've been acting like someone who knows what she's doing," Ruth said with a small smile. I laughed quietly. "Good answer." When she left, I stood at the window, watching her footprints fade into the snow. The sky had taken on that late, winter gray, the kind that came before more weather. I gathered the papers into the tote, sliding the ledger on top. It was heavier now, not just with documents, but with the weight of what they meant. My phone buzzed. A voicemail alert. I pressed play. Elaine's voice spilling out, light, almost sing-song. "Mom, I think we should get together soon. Maybe go over some paperwork, you know. Make sure everything's in order." I deleted it without saving. In the quiet that followed, I looked at the clock. Just enough daylight left to make one more stop before the post office closed. The next step in my plan couldn't wait another day. The late afternoon light was fading as I pulled into the parking lot of the county clerk's office. The brick building stood low against the pale sky, its windows glowing warm in the cold. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and old carpet. A receptionist behind a high counter looked up. "How can I help you?" "I'd like to request certified copies of my property deed," I said. She slid a form toward me, the paper smooth under my palm. "Fill this out, and I'll have them printed in about 15 minutes. I wrote slowly, my pen steady. The date, the parcel number, my signature, my real signature. Each letter felt like staking a claim. When she returned, she handed me 3 embossed copies, the gold seal pressed into the corner. They were heavier than plain paper, the kind you couldn't ignore in court. From there, I drove straight to Union Valley to place one copy in my new safe deposit box. The vault's cool air wrapped around me as I slid the folder into its slot. The sound of the box closing was sharp, final. Back home, I made tea and spread the remaining copies on the kitchen table alongside the forged authorizations and insurance letter. The contrast was stark. One pile proof of ownership, the other proof of trespass. I opened my ledger and added 2 new lines. Feb 13 obtained certified deed copies. Feb 13 stored 1 copy in UVS vault. The pen hovered before I wrote a 3rd note, evidence file complete. Evening settled in, the lake outside shifting from gray to black. I closed the curtains, feeling the warmth of the kitchen lamp pool over the table. At 7, the phone rang. No caller ID. I let it go to voicemail. A moment later, I listened. Elaine again, her voice softer this time. "Mom, I just want to make sure you're comfortable. Maybe we could meet this weekend. Talk about the future?" The future she meant wasn't the one I was building. I hit delete. Then I took a fresh envelope from the drawer, sliding one forged authorization form and the insurance letter inside. On the front, I wrote the name of a lawyer Frank had once trusted, Arthur L. Pierce. I'd call his office tomorrow, not to start a fight, but to make sure I had another wall between me and Elaine's reach. Ruth called just as I was sealing the envelope. "Still awake?" "For now," I said. "Whatever you're working on," she told me, "keep at it. You look more alive than you have in months." Her words lingered after I hung up. Alive. That was exactly what I felt. By 9, everything was packed neatly away. The ledger in the desk, the evidence folder in my bedroom safe, the lawyer's envelope in my purse. I poured one last cup of tea, letting the steam rise into the quiet room. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere across town, Elaine might have been planning her own next move. I smiled into the cup, knowing mine was already in motion. Would you have kept your plans hidden until the perfect moment, or confronted them the second you had proof? The day I chose was cold but clear, the kind of winter morning where the lake looked like glass. I'd circled the date in my ledger a week ago. Cutoff, I'd written beside it in ink. By 9 a.m. I was in the bank manager's office at First Harbor. The same man who'd helped me freeze Elaine's access greeted me with a firm handshake. "Ready?" he asked. "More than ready," I said. On his desk sat two folders, my checking account and a small investment portfolio Frank had set up years before. Both still had Elaine listed as secondary. Today, that would end. The manager slid forms toward me. The paper was crisp under my fingers as I signed, each stroke erasing a door she'd once walked through. When I finished, he stamped each page with a sharp click of his seal. "That's it," he said. "She has no access, no visibility. If she tries, we'll see the attempt." Walking out of the branch, I felt the winter air bite at my cheeks, sharper than usual. My tote was lighter without those files inside. Next stop was the county tax office. I handed over a change of address form for all property tax notices, redirecting them to my Union Valley P.O. box. The clerk stamped it with a dated seal. "Effective immediately," she said. From there, I drove to the insurance office. Patty recognized my voice before I even gave my name. "I'm here in person to reaffirm the restrictions," I told her. She smiled. "Your file is locked down tighter than Fort Knox." I left with a printed confirmation, the paper warm from the printer. Another wall raised. By early afternoon, the main pieces were in place. Elaine couldn't reach my accounts, intercept my mail, or touch my policies. She didn't know it yet, but the bridge she'd been walking was gone. Back home, I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the steam curling into the quiet air. The ledger lay open beside me, each line a record of a step taken. I imagined the moment she'd try to log in or call the bank and hear the words, "We can't discuss that account with you." The thought steadied me. This wasn't revenge, not yet. It was the opening move. At 3, the phone rang. Elaine's name lit the screen. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, I listened. "Mom, I've been meaning to check in. Thought maybe we could go over finances this weekend, just to be sure everything's in good order." Her timing was almost perfect. Almost. I deleted the message and closed the ledger. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying a sharp edge off the lake. The next step would be harder and louder. It happened faster than I expected. The next morning, I was folding laundry when the phone rang. Elaine's name flashed on the screen. I answered this time. Her voice was tight, no greeting. "Mom, I just tried to log into your bank account. It says I'm not authorized. Did you change something?" I set the towel down, smoothing the fabric.
Yes, silence.
Then sharper.
Why?
"We agreed I'd help you keep things organized." "We didn't agree," I said. "You decided." Her breath came through the line, fast and shallow. "You're making a mistake. You don't know how complicated these things can be." I looked out the window at the lake, the ice shining under a pale sun. "I know exactly how complicated they've been. That's why I'm simplifying." A long pause. I could almost hear her recalculating. Is this about the medication or the insurance? "Mom, you're overreacting." I cut in, my voice steady. "It's about trust, Elaine. And what happens when it's gone?" Her tone hardened. "If you start making these changes without me, it's going to be a mess. David and I can't fix everything from the outside." "That's the point," I said. Another pause. Then she tried a softer angle. "Look, maybe we can talk this over at dinner. Just us." I glanced at the folded laundry, the neat stacks, order where there had been chaos. "I'll think about it." When I hung up, the room felt still, as if even the house was listening. By noon, Ruth stopped by with a loaf of bread. "You've got that look," she said, setting it on the counter. "What look?" "The one you get when the wind's picking up and you're bracing for it." I smiled faintly. She called. "She knows." "And?" "She's rattled, but not finished." Ruth nodded slowly. "Then neither are you." That afternoon, I made one more quiet call to Arthur Pierce's office. His assistant remembered Frank and set an appointment for next week. I told her I'd be bringing documents. "Make sure they're copied twice," she advised. When I hung up, I slid the evidence folder into my tote. The weight of it felt different now, less like preparation, more like a loaded arrow. Near sunset, my phone buzzed again. A text from Elaine. "We need to talk tonight." I didn't answer. Instead, I stood at the window, watching the lake fade into the dark. Somewhere out there, the ice was shifting under its own weight, silent but certain. The next move would not be hers. I chose Saturday evening. Elaine had invited me to their house, a gesture that felt less like kindness and more like a summons. I arrived with my tote slung over my shoulder, the cold air biting my cheeks. David opened the door, his smile tight. "Glad you could make it?" The living room smelled faintly of garlic and rosemary. Elaine emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "We've been worried about you," she said, her voice smooth. I set my coat over a chair. "No need. I've been busy. Dinner was served quickly, too quickly. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans." We ate in polite silence until Elaine leaned back, wine glass in hand. "So, about these changes, I think we should review them together. Make sure nothing's been done in haste." I reached into my tote and placed the folder on the table. The gold seal on the deed copy caught the light. "These aren't changes, Elaine. They're corrections?" David frowned.
What's this?
"Proof," I said. I slid the forged authorization toward him, the inked loops of my name just wrong enough to stand out. This is not my signature, and yet it was used to gain access to my accounts. Elaine's face flushed. "You're twisting this. I was just trying to help," I cut in, "but changing my medication. By requesting changes to my insurance beneficiaries." I tapped the second document. "Be adding yourself to my bank account without my consent." David's fork clinked against his plate.
Elaine?
"I did what I thought was best," she snapped. "For whom?" My voice was steady, but inside something sharp and long buried was uncoiling. "You didn't think I'd notice, but I did. And as of this week, you have no access to my accounts, my property, or my policies?" Her chair scraped back. "You can't just shut me out like this." "I already have." The words hung there, heavier than the room could hold. David broke the silence. "Maybe we should talk about this calmly." "This is calm," I said. "This is me setting boundaries you should have respected from the start." Elaine's eyes darted to the folder. "What are you going to do with that?" I closed it, sliding it back into my tote. "For now, nothing, but it's all documented and it's all mine to decide." The clock on the wall ticked loud in the stillness. I stood, slipping my coat over my shoulders. "Thank you for dinner?" Elaine's voice followed me to the door. "You're making a mistake, Mom?" I turned just enough to meet her eyes. "No, I'm ending one." Outside, the cold hit like a clean blade, sharp and bracing. The night sky was clear, stars pinpricking the dark. In the car, I set the tote on the seat beside me. For the first time in months, it felt lighter. Tomorrow, I'd start thinking about what came next. The next morning, the house felt different. Not warmer, not quieter, just clearer. The kind of clarity that comes after a storm passes and you can see the horizon again. I made coffee, the smell filling the kitchen. Outside, frost clung to the maple branches, each twig lined in white. The lake lay still, as if holding its breath. The phone didn't ring, no texts, no missed calls. It was almost noon before I realized I hadn't heard from Elaine or David. Ruth dropped by with a jar of peach preserves. "Thought you might need something sweet after last night," she said, setting it on the counter. I smiled. "It went about how I expected." She raised an eyebrow. "Meaning?" They didn't deny what they did. They just didn't like that I noticed. Ruth leaned against the counter, arms folded. "You sure they won't try again?" "They might," I said. "But now they'll have to go through locked doors to do it." We had tea at the table, the steam curling into the morning light. Ruth asked about my plans for the week, and for the first time in months, my answers didn't include avoiding someone else's interference. After she left, I walked through the house, checking small things I'd neglected. Tightening the latch on the back door, dusting the top of the hutch, watering the plant in the study. Each task was simple, but each one felt like reclaiming a corner of my life. In the afternoon, I went into town for groceries. The clerk at the market greeted me by name, asked how I'd been. I told her busy, and it was true, but not in the way she'd think. Driving home, I noticed the farmhouse road branching off the highway. The urge to take it was strong, but I let it pass. Not today. That house was safe now, and so was I. Back home, I checked the mail. Only a flyer from the hardware store and a postcard from an old friend in Arizona. No bills with Elaine's fingerprints on them. No official notices demanding signatures I never gave. I cooked dinner, salmon, roasted potatoes, and green beans. The kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and lemon. Eating alone didn't feel like a punishment tonight. It felt like choice. Afterward, I sat in the living room with the lamp on low, reading through a stack of letters Frank had written during his army years. His handwriting was strong, deliberate, like the man himself. In one, he'd written, "You're tougher than you think, and quieter than they expect. That's how you win." I folded the letter and set it on the table beside me. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, but it didn't sound threatening anymore. Just part of the night? By the time I went to bed, I realized I hadn't thought about what Elaine might be planning next. My mind was on other things, small, steady things that belonged to me alone. Tomorrow I'd wake up and decide what to do with my day, without anyone else's agenda hanging over it. 3 days passed without a word from Elaine or David. On the 4th morning, the mailman left a small stack in the box. I flipped through it by the front window. Utilities, a bank statement from Union Valley, and a single envelope from my lawyer, Arthur Pierce. Inside was a short note in his careful hand, "All documents received. Files secured. Call anytime." I set it on the desk in the study. That drawer, once cluttered with bills and stray papers, now held only what I chose to keep. The keys to the safe deposit box sat beside them, a quiet reminder that I held every lock. Later that day, I walked into town. The air had a bite, the kind that turned your cheeks pink in minutes. At the market, Mrs. Henley at the bakery counter asked if I'd be baking for the church supper this year. "I think I will," I said. The words came easily, without the hesitation of wondering if someone else had claimed my time. Back home, I unpacked groceries and started a pot of vegetable soup. The smell of carrots and thyme filled the kitchen, warm against the winter chill. I moved slowly, savoring each step, the rinse of the vegetables, the rhythmic chop, the hiss when they met the hot pot. The phone rang once around 3, unknown number. I let it go. No message was left. In the afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with my ledger. Instead of recording another defensive step, I wrote a new heading: plans. Under it, I listed 3 things: visit the farmhouse in spring, start a small garden by the lake, sort Frank's books for the library donation. The ink looked different under that heading. Less like guardrails, more like open doors. Just before sunset, I walked down to the lake. The ice at the edges had begun to crack, revealing dark water beneath. A thin wind came off the surface, carrying the smell of pine from the far shore. I thought of Frank, of the letter he'd left, of how each step I'd taken since opening it had been in line with his quiet kind of wisdom. "You hold the keys." He'd been right. Back inside, I ladled soup into a bowl and carried it to the living room. The lamplight was soft, the radio low. I ate slowly, watching the fire in the stove shift and settle. When the phone rang again, I answered without checking the ID. It was Ruth. "You sound good," she said. "I am," I told her, and I meant it. We talked about the weather, about the church supper, about nothing urgent at all. When I hung up, the house felt even warmer. I knew there would still be ripples from what I'd done. People don't lose access to what they think is theirs without pushing back. But if Elaine tried again, she'd find nothing open to her. And for the first time in a long while, I could look toward tomorrow without bracing for the next intrusion. The lake had begun to thaw. Thin sheets of ice drifted in the wind, clicking softly against the shore. Morning sunlight spilled across the water, and for the first time in months, I stepped outside without a coat. I carried my coffee down to the dock, the boards creaking under my feet. The air smelled of wet earth and pine, sharp and clean. Ducks floated near the reeds, their low chatter mixing with the soft lap of water. This was my first spring without Frank, my first season free from Elaine's shadow. The quiet felt different now, not absence but space. I'd been making small changes. A shelf cleared in the study for new books, fresh curtains in the kitchen, pale blue to match the lake on a clear day. The P.O. box key hung on a hook by the door, alongside the key to my safe deposit box. 2 small pieces of metal, but they carried the weight of every choice I now owned. This morning I opened my ledger to a fresh page. Across the top I wrote new beginnings. The list was short but bright. Plant tomatoes and herbs in May. Organize a lake cleanup with Ruth and the church group. Visit the farmhouse with a picnic. I smiled at that last one. The farmhouse had stood untouched all winter, its windows catching the low sun on my last drive past. I imagined opening those shutters again, letting the air rush through. Around mid-morning, Ruth came by with a basket of daffodils from her garden. "Spring suits you," she said, setting them on the counter. It feels good, I told her. Like I've got my own weather now. We sat by the window with tea, talking about the church supper, the new families moving into town, and a library fundraiser next month. Ruth suggested I donate some of Frank's books. The thought didn't pinch the way it might have before. When she left, I placed the daffodils in a vase on the kitchen table. Their yellow heads nodded in the sunlight, bright against the pale cloth. That afternoon, I walked the edge of the property, noting where the snow had pulled back to reveal the grass. My boots left soft impressions in the damp ground. In one bare patch by the porch, I knelt and pressed my palm to the earth, cool and solid. It was the same ground Frank and I had worked together for decades, the same ground I would now shape on my own terms. The lake breeze lifted my hair as I stood, and for a moment, I felt the future. Not rushing toward me, but opening steady and wide. 2 weeks later, the church hall buzzed with the sound of voices and clinking dishes. The long tables were lined with crockpots, casseroles, and pies. Ruth waved me over, a ladle in her hand. "Your soup's a hit," she said, nodding toward the empty pot at the end of the table. I laughed. That's what happens when you add a little thyme and a lot of patience. We moved through the crowd, greeting neighbors I hadn't seen in months. Mrs. Henley from the bakery asked about the lake cleanup. "We'll do it first Saturday in May," I told her. "Bring gloves and an appetite." Ruth's making sandwiches. Later, I sat with a group of women near the windows. Conversation turned to children, then grandchildren, then the way life shifts when they grow into their own worlds. A woman named Helen leaned closer. "Sometimes I feel unnecessary," she admitted softly. I knew that ache. I touched her hand. "You're not. It just takes time to see where you fit next." But there is a next. Her smile was small but real. The following weekend, I drove to the farmhouse. The air was warmer, the road lined with early wildflowers. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the cool, still rooms. Sunlight slanted across the floorboards. Dust motes floated in the beams, unbothered by the months of quiet. I opened the shutters in the kitchen. The view of the ridge rolled out before me, green just starting to show. I could see Frank here, leaning against the counter, coffee in hand. From my tote, I pulled a small box and set it on the windowsill. Inside were seed packets, tomatoes, basil, zinnias, the first pieces of a garden that would belong to this place, to me, and to whoever came after. Back at the lake house that evening, I stood on the dock as the sun dipped low. The water caught the light, turning it into a path of gold stretching toward the far shore. I thought of all the nights I'd stared at this view feeling cornered, diminished. Now, it felt like an open door. The ledger was on the table inside, still open to the new beginnings page. I added one more line: invite others to share this space. Because legacy wasn't just about what you kept safe. It was about what you gave forward. I don't know who will walk this shoreline after me, but I do know they'll find it whole. If you've ever been left behind, remember your story isn't over. The quiet you find can be the start of something stronger. You're not alone.